This is the fourth part in a series of teachings about critical thinking. This reading comes from Stella Cottrell's The Study Skills Handbook, which is a very, very excellent book, and I highly recommend it for students planning to go to study in English-speaking universities. Very, very useful book. Anyway, Chapter 10, Critical Analytical Thinking. Critical thinking means weighing up the arguments and evidence for and against some idea. Edward Glaser, who developed a test of critical thinking, defined it in this way. Critical thinking calls for a persistent effort to examine any belief or supposed form of knowledge in the light of the evidence that supports it and the further conclusions to which it tends. In other words, it means you must consider an issue carefully, evaluate the evidence put forward in support of the belief or the viewpoint, and consider where the belief or viewpoint leads. What conclusions would follow? Are these suitable and rational? And if not, should the belief or viewpoint be reconsidered? Okay, Stella Cottrell also writes about analytical thinking and says analytical thinking involves additional processes. These include standing back from the information given to try and look at it more objectively and be less personally involved. Examining it in detail from many angles. Checking closely whether it is completely accurate. Checking whether each statement follows logically from what went before. Looking for possible flaws in the reasoning, the evidence, or the way the conclusions are drawn. Are there any problems? Comparing the same issue from the point of view of other theorists or different writers. Being able to see and explain why different people arrived at different conclusions. Being able to argue why one set of opinions, results, or conclusions is preferable to another. Being on guard for literary or statistical devices that encourage the reader to take questionable statements at face value. That's very common. Checking for hidden assumptions and bias. Checking for attempts to lure the reader into agreement. So looking at persuasive language and persuasive devices. Is your agreement justified? Okay. Stella Cottrell also offers some advice how to develop a critical and analytical mind like a detective. Well, for reading, critical thinking when reading involves the following: identifying the line of reasoning in the text, critically evaluating the line of reasoning, questioning surface appearances and checking for hidden assumptions or agendas, identifying evidence in the text, evaluating the evidence according to valid criteria, identifying the writer's conclusions, deciding whether the evidence given supports the writer's conclusions. When writing, critical thinking involves very similar processes. You need to be clear what your conclusions are, show a clear line of reasoning, an argument leading to your conclusion. You need to present evidence to support your reasoning. Read your own writing critically. This is a very useful piece of advice. Read your own writing in the same way you'd read somebody else's writing, checking that the sources and the evidence support the conclusions. Think about your subject from different viewpoints or perspectives. and write in a critical, analytical style. Try to avoid just descriptive or personal styles. Okay, and when listening, critical thinking involves same kind of awareness as when you're reading, and also you have to check for the consistency in what the speaker is saying. Does the speaker appear to contradict herself? And if so, what's going on beneath that contradiction? Look at the body language, eye contact, the speed and tone of the voice. Are they consistent with what is being said? Does the speaker look and sound as though he or she believes what he or she is saying? Okay. Perhaps the most important point about critical thinking and how to think critically is asking questions. You have to ask questions. In general, when working in a critical way, you will be asking questions such as, number 1, why? Number 2, how? How far? How much? How often? To what extent? How do we know this is true? How reliable is this source? What could be going on below the surface? What do we not know about this topic? Okay, that's enough. There's a whole chapter on this stuff in Cottrell's book, and I highly recommend you read it.